Hi friends, today I want to talk about the difference between self-healing and enlightenment and how they are not the same and why sometimes people confuse the two. This came about because I was having a priest meeting, the priests of the temple get together in kind of a study group with our teacher, and this is an idea that came out of one of these meetings, and I've been thinking about it a little bit. I think a lot of people have this idea that enlightenment will cause or lead to or is the same thing as self-healing, and it really isn't, and there's some reasons for that. And so I want to kind of open with a Dogen quote to kind of frame this a little bit. So this quote is that realization doesn't destroy the person any more than the reflection of the moon breaks the water droplet. And what Dogen is saying is that this experience of realization does not destroy the personhood, the individuality of the person. Sometimes what happens is people can get very anxious, especially when they run into ideas of emptiness or no self, and they get this kind of twisted idea that feels like annihilation. And so on the one hand, Dogen is explaining that this bigger, broader perspective of enlightenment, of having a realization experience, of seeing things as they are, they don't annihilate the person. Your personality, your individuality, your sense of identity doesn't explode into nothingness. It doesn't mush away like old ramen. There's a change in your relationship to it, but it's not annihilated, and that's really important. And this points to the difference between a realization experience or enlightenment and this kind of concept of self-healing. So we sometimes talk about what is called the constructed self. And your constructed self is kind of your individual person's story. So I was born in this particular time and place, into this set of circumstances. These things happen to me. I like these things. I don't like these things. This sense of individuation in the world. And that's a real thing. You know, one of the things that we say, and so does NLI, is that the self exists, but it's not what you think it is. But we all kind of operate, if you think of like an operating system, our operating system very often is the perspective of this constructed self. And so self-healing would be things like dealing with phobias, overcoming past traumas. If you're a person like me who tends towards anger, working with your anger. If you're a person that tends towards anxiety or depression, you work with those things. So self-healing, the self is real, right? There is a self, and healing of some of the kind of challenging aspects of that constructed self, that's real and valid and is a thing that occurs. But that's not what realization is. Realization is seeing things as they are. And it's important to remember that any ideas you might have of realization or enlightenment, those are ideas that are created by that constructed self. And your constructed self really can't see past its own kind of operating system, its own point of view. So any ideas you have about realization or enlightenment are just ideas about realization or enlightenment. You can't really comprehend of the experience of a radical transformative change in viewpoint or operating system until it occurs. So just keep that in mind, that it's fine to have ideas about what enlightenment or realization are, or what an enlightenment or realization experience might be, but just remember that those are ideas of that constructed self. And realization is more like seeing through the story of the constructed self. And so the constructed self still exists. It's not a problem. You can still have your likes, your dislikes, your individuality, the people you enjoy being around, the people you don't. Sometimes if you have traumas or habits of thought, neural pathways, chemical pathways in your body, some of those might change and diminish over time if they're kind of like harmful or negative, and some we might be dealing with until we die, until it passes on. But this realization allows you to see a kind of more spacious perspective kind of through the story. It doesn't destroy the story, but it allows you to see through it, not past it, because the story is included. So I really like to say through the story of the constructed self. And this allows us to relate and respond in a more skillful and spacious way, where, for example, if we're meeting another person, we don't need them to act a certain way to fulfill a need in us that causes us to stop relating to them. So if I am, for example, a person that really needs a lot of external validation. And that's where I'm coming from when I interact with people. Like, I need you to validate me, or it's not a successful interaction. And I really only relate to you as an external thing that meets my needs. That's a very constructed self-centric point of view. You're only operating from a very limited viewpoint. Uh, Coming from a more realized perspective might be, I recognize that I have in me these needs for validation, but that's not what this other person is here for, and I can meet them where they are, and maybe that's really not their job. And so it's not, again, that the self is destroyed. As Dogen says, realization does not destroy the self any more than the reflection of the moon destroys the drop of water, but it does allow us to see through that and have a more spacious perspective. So I think if you go to a Zen temple and expect that you will have an enlightenment experience and all your problems will go away, I think you're going to be very disappointed. And that's a very constructed self-centric view of it. If you meditate for a long time and you have big enlightenment experiences, your mom might still be a narcissist, or your boss still might be hot-headed. Those things are not necessarily going away. With those realization experiences, when you integrate them, when they become a part of your kind of day-to-day experience, you very likely will be bothered by those things less. Or you might be able to, in the case of a narcissistic parent, set a boundary that comes from a place of compassion, maybe for both of you, rather than like anger, right? But you still might have to set that boundary. And so all of your problems are not going to magically go away. Even if you have deep realization experiences and your spouse dies or your pet dies, you're still going to feel grief. And if you have trauma in your background, those things might always be traumatic events. If you were abused as a child, even with deep insight and realization, you might still feel that acid in your veins when something triggers that memory, or there's a shadow out of the corner of your eye that makes you think of those things. Those things might still occur. And yet you can encompass that with this broader point of view. So even these things that we consider bad, that are within this constructed self, are not necessarily a problem. But it doesn't mean that you're going to heal all those things in meditation and never have bad feelings again. And this is why I sometimes say, and I think many Zen teachers and other Buddhist teachers say, that the therapy might be helpful for people, but that's different than Buddhist practice. And if you go into Zen or Buddhist practice expecting it to fix all of your problems, and you kind of don't deal with the various levels where these things manifest, I think you could be disappointed, or you could have what I call that spiritual bypass, where you're like, oh, I'm so enlightened, nothing ever bothers me, even the fact that I was beaten as a kid. And that's not necessarily how things are going to work out. And so just remember that any ideas you have about enlightenment or realization or an experience of these things, those are ideas that your constructed self is coming forth with. And so it's going to probably not be right, because the constructed self can't really see past itself. And that even when you are in a position to have these realization experiences, that's different than doing self-healing work that might also need to be done. And again, it's not that these experiences do not allow for more spacious relationship with some of these problematic aspects of the constructed self, but that's not the point of enlightenment, right? The point of enlightenment is not to make you feel better about your shitty boss or your narcissistic mom. It's not really stress reduction. Some of those things can occur, but the point of enlightenment is just to see things as they really are. And that's really kind of through and bigger than the constructed self, which tends to be our kind of operating system. So these are just some thoughts on why enlightenment and self-healing are not the same, and why sometimes people get them confused, and why I think it's important to be really clear in your practice about how those things are different. Thank you.